The wind howled through the frozen tundra, a relentless force sweeping across the desolate landscape. Snowflakes danced in the air like ghosts, swirling around jagged ice formations that had stood undisturbed for decades. The bitter cold was unforgiving, the kind that gnawed at exposed skin and turned breath into thick clouds of mist. It was the kind of place where time stood still, where secrets remained buried beneath layers of ice and snow, untouched by human hands. But on this particular day, something was different. A German shepherd named Rex trotted ahead of his handler, his paws crunching softly against the thick snow. His breath came in rapid puffs, his nose twitching against the icy air. He had been trained for search and rescue missions, his keen senses capable of detecting things hidden beneath the surface, things others might never notice. And today, Rex had picked up a scent. His ears perked up, his body tensed. His handler, Mark Callahan, felt the tug on the leash as Rex pulled forward with newfound urgency. "What is it, boy?" Mark murmured, adjusting his thick fur-lined coat. The team had been sent out to investigate an anomaly spotted by a remote satellite, something large buried beneath the ice of this remote Arctic region. At first, they had assumed it was just another iceberg or rock formation. But as they drew closer, the shape became clearer. It wasn't natural. It was something man-made. Mark's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. A fuselage, half buried in the snow, its metal exterior coated in a thick layer of ice. A plane that had no business being here. The rest of the team caught up, their boots crunching in the snow as they stared in stunned silence. This was no ordinary wreckage. The markings on the side were faded but unmistakable. The emblem of an airline that had disappeared decades ago. No distress signals. No survivors ever found. Just a ghost story whispered among aviators. Until now. Rex barked, breaking the silence. His paws scraped against the ice as he dug furiously, his instincts telling him there was someone beneath the frozen surface. Mark swallowed hard. What they were about to uncover would shock the world. Mark Callahan's heart pounded in his chest as he signaled the rest of the team to move in. Ice and snow caked the wreckage, disguising the aircraft's true size. But even through the obscured view, he could tell this was a large passenger plane. The sheer weight of history pressed against him. How long had it been here? How many lives had been lost in this tragedy? But there was no time for reflection. Rex's frantic barking jolted Mark into action. The German shepherd was digging furiously near what appeared to be the cockpit door, his claws scraping against the frozen shell of the aircraft. His breath came in sharp, visible bursts, each exhale clouding the air before vanishing into the Arctic cold. Mark knelt beside him, brushing away chunks of snow and ice. His fingers, though protected by thick gloves, felt the sharp chill of the fuselage beneath them. "Help me clear this," he called out, and within seconds, the team was at his side, hacking away at the hardened frost with ice picks and shovels. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Finally, with a metallic groan, the door to the cockpit gave way, swinging open just enough to allow a sliver of darkness to peer back at them. A gust of stale, icy air rushed out, sending a shiver down Mark's spine. He adjusted his headlamp, illuminating the interior. What they saw inside made his breath catch. The cockpit was eerily preserved. The pilot and co-pilot, frozen in time, still sat in their seats. Their uniforms were stiff with ice, their hands gripping the controls as if they had been bracing for impact. It was a haunting sight, like staring at ghosts. "This can't be real," one of the team members whispered. "It's real," Mark said grimly, "and we need to find out if there's more." Rex wasn't done. His ears twitched as he backed away from the cockpit, his nose working overtime. Then, without hesitation, he bounded toward the partially collapsed section of the fuselage, where the cabin doors had been torn open by the force of impact. Mark followed, dread settling in his stomach. The likelihood of survivors was impossible. The wreckage had been here for decades. But still, Rex had never led them astray before. Carefully, they stepped inside. The cabin was a frozen tomb. Rows of seats, still upright, stretched into the darkness, their passengers frozen in their last moments. Some clutched onto their armrests. Others leaned against the windows as if they'd simply fallen asleep. Time had preserved their expressions in a haunting, chilling way. A lump formed in Mark's throat, but he forced himself to keep moving. He had seen death before, but never like this. It was as if the passengers had been waiting to be found. Then, Rex let out a sharp, high-pitched whine. He was at the far end of the cabin, where the plane had broken apart upon impact. His nose was pressed against what looked like a pile of debris, his tail wagging in a nervous, hesitant rhythm. "What is it, boy?" Mark murmured, stepping closer. Then he heard it. A sound. Faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A whimper. Mark's eyes widened. It couldn't be. "Did you hear that?" someone asked, voice trembling. "Yeah," Mark said, his pulse quickening. He dropped to his knees, helping Rex dig through the frozen wreckage. Metal creaked and groaned as they pulled away broken seats and shattered panels. The sound grew louder, a weak, fragile cry that sent shivers down Mark's spine. And then, beneath layers of ice and debris, they saw it. A child, a little girl, wrapped in a tattered airline blanket, her face pale but unmistakably alive. Her tiny chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, her lips trembling as she clung to the frozen fabric around her. Mark's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. How? How is this possible? One of the medics rushed forward, pressing 2 fingers against the girl's neck. "She's alive," he confirmed, his voice thick with disbelief. Hypothermic but alive. The entire team stood frozen, unable to comprehend the miracle before them. This plane had been missing for over 50 years. There was no logical explanation for how this child could be here, let alone breathing. But she was, and Rex had found her. The German shepherd nosed the child gently, his warm breath fanning over her frostbitten cheeks. She stirred, just slightly, her eyelids fluttering open. Her eyes, large, dark, and filled with something ancient, locked onto Mark's. Then, in the faintest whisper, she spoke. "They never left," she said. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. The wind outside howled louder, shaking the wreckage. The frozen passengers remained unmoving, their empty eyes staring ahead. And in that moment, Mark realized this was no ordinary rescue. This was something else entirely. Mark's breath hitched in his throat. They never left. The little girl's whisper hung in the frozen air, her voice impossibly fragile, yet heavy with meaning. The words sent an eerie chill down his spine, one that had nothing to do with the Arctic cold. Around them, the plane's frozen passengers remained eerily still, locked in time. Their glassy, frost-covered eyes stared into the void, unblinking. Rex whined, his ears flattening against his head. He turned in a slow circle, his fur bristling as he scanned the wreckage. The German shepherd was trained for many things. He could detect human scent, sense movement, and even pick up on emotions. But the way he reacted now was different. He wasn't just tracking a scent. He was sensing something else. Mark reached for his radio, his fingers trembling slightly as he pressed the button. "This is Callahan. We have a survivor." Repeat, "We have a survivor." Static. He frowned, adjusting the frequency. "Base, do you copy?" Nothing. Just a low, crackling hum. One of the medics, Dr. Reynolds, finished checking the girl's vitals. He shook his head in disbelief. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "She's hypothermic, but not nearly as bad as she should be. If she's been out here for days, let alone decades, she shouldn't be alive. She shouldn't even exist," one of the other rescuers whispered. The girl stirred again, her small hands gripping the tattered airline blanket wrapped around her. Her lips were blue, her dark eyes wide and distant. She wasn't crying. She wasn't panicked. She was just watching. Mark knelt beside her. "Hey, sweetheart, you're safe now. Can you tell me your name?" A long silence stretched between them. The wind whistled through the broken fuselage, rattling loose shards of metal. Finally, she whispered Elena. Mark exchanged a glance with Reynolds. "Elena," Mark repeated gently. "That's a beautiful name. Do you remember what happened? How you got here?" Her gaze flickered toward the frozen passengers, the ones who had died in their seats, locked in place for over half a century. They were waiting, she said softly. They said you'd come. Mark's stomach twisted. He swallowed hard, keeping his voice steady. Who was waiting, sweetheart? She turned to him, eyes gleaming with something ancient. The others. A deep, guttural growl erupted from Rex. Mark barely had time to react before the dog lunged, his hackles raised, his powerful frame positioning itself between the girl and the rest of the plane. His bared teeth gleamed in the dim light of their headlamps. His tail was rigid, his entire body tense, ready to fight. But fight what? There was nothing there. Mark scanned the cabin, his flashlight beam cutting through the ice and shadows. His breath came faster now, his own instincts screaming at him that something was wrong. He wasn't a superstitious man. He had spent years in rescue operations, had seen things most people would never believe. But this was different. Rex, stand down, he murmured. But the dog didn't move. Then the temperature dropped. The cold had already been unbearable, but this was something else entirely. A deep, suffocating freeze that clung to their skin, burned their lungs, and made the ice beneath them creak and groan. And then the whispering started, low, almost imperceptible at first. Mark's heart pounded as the voices curled through the air like tendrils of smoke, rising and falling in eerie, rhythmic patterns. Words he couldn't quite understand. Sounds that didn't belong. They weren't coming from his team. They were coming from the frozen passengers. Rex let out a sharp bark, snapping at the air as if he could see something the others couldn't. Dr. Reynolds stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror. What the hell is that? Mark tightened his grip on his flashlight. We're leaving. Now. But the girl, Elena, didn't move. She just sat there, staring at him. They won't let you. A deafening crack split the air. The fuselage shifted. Ice shattered, sending shards raining down from the ceiling. The walls groaned as if something massive was pressing against them. Then, all at once, the lights on their headlamps flickered, and every frozen passenger, every single one of them, turned their heads toward Mark. Rex lunged. The German shepherd's body moved before Mark could react, his powerful form leaping through the air, snapping his jaws at something unseen. But whatever force had taken hold of the plane wasn't letting go. The frozen passengers remained still, their lifeless eyes fixed on the living. The whispers rose into a chorus. Stay. The girl, still sitting in the wreckage, tilted her head. You don't belong here. Another crack. The ice beneath them trembled. Mark barely had time to react before Rex clamped his teeth around the sleeve of his jacket and yanked him backward, just as the ground beneath him caved in. A gaping hole split through the fuselage, swallowing debris and seats into the frozen abyss below. A cavern had been hiding beneath them, the ice fragile and thin in places where time had worn it down. If Rex hadn't pulled him away, Mark shook the thought from his mind, scrambling to his feet. Move! Get out of here! The team rushed toward the exit, their boots slipping on the unstable ice. Mark reached for Elena, but she was already standing, her tiny fingers gripping Rex's fur. The dog wasn't leaving without her. Come on, Mark shouted, scooping her up as Rex bolted beside him. The whispers turned into shrieks. The frozen passengers trembled, their forms twitching as if they were trying to move. But the moment the team reached the torn opening of the plane, the noise stopped. Silence. The cold eased. Mark turned back just in time to see the figures inside freeze once more, their eerie, dead stares returning to their original positions. The wreckage had gone still, as if nothing had happened. Rex let out a low growl, watching the plane with wary eyes. The German shepherd had sensed it first. He had known before any of them that something wasn't right. And if it hadn't been for him, Mark wasn't sure any of them would have made it out. The moment they stepped onto solid ground, Elena let out a long breath. They let you go, she murmured. Mark knelt beside her. Who let us go? She looked back at the wreckage, at the plane lost in time. The ones who never left. The radio crackled to life. This is base command. Callahan, do you copy? Mark exhaled shakily, pressing the button. We copy. We're bringing someone back with us. The static hummed for a moment before the response came. That's impossible. There were no survivors. Mark glanced at Elena, and in the distance, the wreckage of the plane remained. Silent, waiting, just as it had for the last 50 years. The snowstorm had eased by the time Mark and his team reached the extraction point, but the cold lingered like an unwelcome shadow. The sky, a vast and unbroken expanse of gray, seemed to press down on them, a reminder that they were still deep in the Arctic wilderness, with something far worse than the elements behind them. Mark clutched Elena tightly, his mind racing. She shouldn't exist. A child, perfectly alive, found in a plane that had been buried in ice for over half a century. Every rational part of him screamed that this was impossible, yet here she was, nestled against his chest, her tiny body trembling. Not from the cold, but from something else. Rex trotted beside them, his sharp eyes never leaving the wreckage in the distance. He let out a soft growl every few moments, as if warning whatever unseen presence lingered there to stay back. Dr. Reynolds ran another scan with his portable medical equipment. She's stabilizing, but, Mark, this is insane. There's no frostbite, no malnutrition. It's like she wasn't out here all this time. Mark didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind kept replaying what had happened in the plane, how the frozen passengers had moved, how the whispers had clawed at his mind, how the wreckage itself had felt alive, and how Elena had known. They reached the waiting helicopter. The rotor blades sliced through the frozen air, the deafening sound a welcome reminder of reality. The pilot, Anderson, leaned out. "Took you long enough. Storm's closing in. Get her on board." Mark lifted Elena into the aircraft, wrapping her in an emergency thermal blanket. She gazed up at him, those dark, ancient eyes locking onto his. "You shouldn't have come," she murmured. Mark swallowed hard. "Why?" "Because now they know you're here." Rex let out a sharp bark, his entire body going rigid. He spun toward the snow-covered expanse beyond the wreckage, his fur bristling. Mark followed his gaze, then felt his stomach drop. There were footprints in the snow. Not from their team. Not from any known living thing. They stretched out from the wreckage toward them, fresh, as if something had just been walking among them. And they didn't lead away. They led closer. "Get in the damn chopper now," Mark shouted. The team scrambled inside as the pilot pulled up on the controls, lifting the aircraft into the sky. Snow swirled around them as the Arctic landscape shrank below. Mark exhaled, the weight in his chest lifting. Then Elena gasped. Mark turned. Her small hands clutched Rex's fur, her eyes wide with terror. She pointed out the window. He followed her gaze. Down below, standing outside the wreckage, were figures. Not the frozen passengers. Not ghosts. Something else. Their forms were blurred, like shadows flickering between realities. Their faces were indistinct, yet somehow watching. And as the helicopter rose higher, Mark swore he saw movement inside the plane. The frozen passengers weren't sitting still anymore. They were turning their heads, watching them leave. A chill unlike anything he had ever known ran through his veins. They weren't supposed to leave. Rex whined, pressing closer to Elena. The girl clutched his fur, whispering something in a language Mark couldn't understand. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the figures below vanished. The wreckage blurred in the storm, fading into the endless white. The whispers were gone. But Mark knew this wasn't over. He turned to Elena. Who were they? She looked at him, her expression unreadable. They were never meant to be found. Mark exhaled, running a hand through his hair. His team sat in stunned silence, the weight of what they had witnessed pressing down on them. But as the helicopter soared away, Rex, loyal, intelligent, unwavering, kept his gaze on the horizon. He knew something the others didn't. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a warning. And whatever had been waiting in that frozen graveyard wasn't done with them yet. The helicopter touched down at the Arctic Research Station, its rotor blades slicing through the frigid air as the team scrambled out. The weight of what they had experienced clung to them, heavier than any gear they carried. Mark held Elena tightly as she shivered against him, though he knew it wasn't from a cold. Her small fingers remained wrapped in Rex's thick fur, as if drawing strength from the German shepherd who had refused to leave her side. A swarm of researchers and medics rushed toward them, their voices filled with confusion and urgency. Questions flew from every direction. Where did you find her? How is she alive? What happened out there? Mark had no answers. The wreckage, the whispers, the things in the snow, they defied reason. Even now, as he stood in the bright, sterile light of the station, a part of him still felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the frozen graveyard. But if there was one thing he knew for certain, it was that they wouldn't have made it back if not for Rex. The German shepherd sat beside Elena, his deep brown eyes locked onto her, unwavering. He had sensed something was wrong before any of them had. He had pulled Mark from the collapsing wreckage. He had refused to leave Elena behind, even when the unseen forces in that cursed plane tried to keep them there. He had saved them. Hours passed, and the research team worked tirelessly to examine Elena. They checked her vitals, her body temperature, her neurological responses, everything. The lead doctor, a man with over 30 years of experience in extreme survival cases, emerged from the medical bay, shaking his head. She's stable. No frostbite. No malnutrition. She's in perfect health. Mark ran a hand down his face. That's impossible. Everything about this is impossible, the doctor admitted. He hesitated. Mark, we ran her name through every missing person's database we could access. There's only one result. Mark's pulse quickened, and the doctor exhaled. Elena Vasquez. She was on that flight, the one that crashed in 1971. She was 3 years old when it went down. Mark stared at him, the words sinking in like ice water in his veins. That would make her 57. Silence stretched between them. Elena was no more than 7 or 8 years old. Mark turned to look through the window of the medical bay. Elena sat on the cot, swinging her legs gently, her fingers stroking Rex's ears as the German shepherd leaned against her protectively. She didn't belong to this time. She didn't belong to this world anymore. Yet she was here, breathing, living. Rex turned his head slightly, his sharp eyes meeting Mark's through the glass. The look in the dog's gaze was knowing, almost ancient, as if he understood something they never would. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. As days passed, government officials arrived to take over the investigation. The wreckage site was marked off limits, the official story rewritten with vague details about an unusual rescue and environmental anomalies. Mark and his team were sworn to secrecy, but the world moved on. Elena remained at the research station for weeks, under careful watch. She never spoke of the crash, never answered questions about how she had survived in a place where nothing living should have endured. But she never left Rex's side. Despite everything, the German shepherd had become her guardian, her protector. When officials came to take her away for further study, Rex growled, a deep, primal sound that made even the most hardened men hesitate. And in the end, Mark made a decision. He pulled every string he could, called in every favor, used every bit of leverage he had. And when the process was over, Elena was released into his care. She had nowhere else to go, no past to return to, no family left to claim her. But she had Rex, and as long as he was by her side, she was safe. Years passed. The world moved on, forgetting the strange mystery of a child found in the Arctic, her origins lost to time. Mark never forgot, and neither did Rex. Even as the German shepherd aged, his loyalty never wavered. He remained at Elena's side, guarding her as if the shadows of that wreckage still threatened to pull her back. Perhaps they did. Mark never spoke of the things they had seen, never told Elena what had truly happened in that plane, in that moment where time and reality had seemed to fold in on itself. But he didn't need to. She already knew. And as the years went by, as Elena grew into a young woman, the only thing that truly remained constant was Rex, the dog who had sensed the danger before they had, the one who had refused to leave her behind, the one who had saved them all. And as Mark watched Elena curl up beside Rex one evening, stroking the graying fur of the companion who had never left her side, he realized the truth. Some heroes don't wear uniforms. Some heroes don't seek glory. Some heroes don't even speak, but they save lives all the same. And sometimes, just sometimes, they save something much greater. This is a story about courage, mystery, and the unknown. But above all, It is a story about the silent guardians who walk among us. Rex was more than just a rescue dog. He was a protector, a guide, and a force that existed beyond simple instincts. Maybe he had sensed something no human could. Maybe he had understood that Elena didn't just need to be found. She needed to be saved. And maybe, just maybe, some things in this world and beyond it still recognize the power of loyalty, even when it defies all reason, even when it transcends time.